Welcome back to another episode of Black Sheep and Bad Apples. I'm your host, Loren O'Brien. Mr. Loren O'Brien. And as usual, we've got the Shawn over here.
Oh yeah.
Producer man.
All right. And okay.
The Shawn Hill. And the Mr. Sam here.
Did you say D-Shawn?
No, I said the Shawn. It's hard to tell because D and
Doctor
the sound.
Sam?
One of my best friends' name is Deshawn.
That's dope. So tonight we're going to be discussing like a little history. We're going to be still talking about the Russia stuff like we did last episode, but we're going to be kind of going back in time and talking about something that may or may not be mysterious. It may or may not be some espionage stuff. So it's also just a really interesting story, and
Wait, may or may not?
May or may not.
Huh.
That's what makes it interesting. So we'll get into the details here in a little bit. Sam, are you okay?
That weed is too strong.
You should talk into your microphone more, but I'm sure they heard you, and it is too strong. Half of your mustache blew away.
The bottom half.
Oh man. That'd be great if you just shaved half your face. So it's just like
Have you guys seen the monkey tail beard?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Super weird. So what do you guys know about
I almost did that.
what do you guys know about Dyatlov Pass?
I want to go with a big fat no.
Like nothing?
I'm not. Nope.
Is it that thing you were sort of filling us in about just before we started recording?
Like very vaguely. It's similar to that.
Then I know that.
Yeah. So not much. So what do you guys know
Nothing at
about
all.
Russia and their climate?
Cold.
Really? I thought it was warm.
I mean, they do have their
they do have a
beaches.
tropic
Don't they have like
region,
the largest desert or something? Oh, that's China. Sorry. Same continent. I get them confused.
Now, how much do you guys know about camping?
Lots.
Lots about camping.
Lots
yeah.
about camping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the higher tiers on that one.
And would you say that you guys are proficient and or experienced hikers in regards to more than just going out and then coming back in the same day? Well, would you guys?
Oh, yeah. I've spent months in hiking
Yeah.
at a stretch.
I am still hiking.
He's hiking now, actually.
I'm at mid hike.
Here
Weird.
in his heart.
He's mid-hike in his heart. Well, tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about camping, the terrain of Russia. We're going to be talking about experience.
Okay, so not glamping.
I don't know what that is.
That's where it's like glamour camping. Glamping.
We're going to be talking about the exact opposite of glamping.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
this is rugged. And
Because when you said camping, I was thinking like you drive up with a car, unpack the cooler, call somebody, order pizza.
no, I'm more referring to like hiking and like backpacking,
Like
kind of camping.
Sojourning.
Sojourning. That's a good term for it.
Like you better bring 2 pair of boots.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So do they have on-site firewood for sale in small bundles?
Well,
Yeah, who carries their firewood? That's what I want to know.
well,
Yeah.
so these people did all this shit in the forest, so as such, money you can't really. It's really weird. Trees haven't developed the technology yet to accept bills to like spit out wood like a vending machine yet, and so they had to do it like the old-fashioned
best
way.
tree ever.
That would be so cool. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say LA's getting close. They got those fake the trees that you like are antennas and stuff.
Oh,
they
you
have those everywhere.
Yeah, they have those everywhere.
Are they
So,
everywhere
so,
now?
They have one in Weaverville.
Oh,
Yeah, it just looks like
We
a
don't
pine
have a
tree in
stoplight
Weaverville.
in this county, but we got one of those.
Anyway, so we're gonna start with this journey that these people took tonight. In January of 1959, a group of young college students set off on an expedition to the Ural Mountains in central Russia. Group leader Igor Dyatlov took 9 other hikers with him to reach Mount Ortorten, which is very fun to say. Ortorten.
Or Thornton.
It's just, I love it.
Burzhnoy. Or Thornton.
Ortorten. Like, it's one of my favorite
I
words.
feel like we need to drink a lot more vodka before we can properly pronounce that.
oh.
I'm honestly really upset that this is probably going to be the last time in the episode that we talk. Oh no, we have got one more other time that we talk about Mount Ortorten, but it's very disappointing. But yeah, these college students, all of them are fairly experienced. One of them kind of isn't. All of these people, more or less, all these people come from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, so they're all like college students. They're all about 23. One of them is actually about 38, but they're more or less, they had all come from this one college. And the group had set off on January 23rd by way of train to Seryov, and they had arrived the morning the next day. And the day after that, on the 25th, they had boarded another train to Vigy, where they would disappear into the woods for a few weeks. And the plan was for everybody to be gone for more or less 2 to 3 weeks. Including this train ride, it was about 3 weeks, and they would show back up They would show back up in Vizay around February 12th, and so they had this little window of time, about a 2-week window, 3-week with the train ride that they were looking at, and to some people, like kind of hiking out into the middle of nowhere. This may seem like really extreme, but again, everybody here is basically extremely experienced. There was just that one member, the mysterious one, as we'll come to learn later, Semyon Zolotaryov. He had done 24 on record hikes, and the on record is as a way to give people badges for their mountaineering skills. And so these Semyon Zolotaryov, he had the most experience here. And this is in stark contrast with like most of the others who had like 4 to 8 on record hikes. Whereas Yuri Krievoshenko had 0 experience with hiking, and so this is kind of
on the record.
He's here.
On the record hikes, yeah, exactly.
I'm here for my first badge.
Yeah, and we can kind of assume that he's done hikes, but we don't really know a whole lot.
He's a friend of a friend.
What is
exactly?
What's the name of the mountain again?
Ortorten, Let me see, Ortorten. And so, having like talked about a little bit of the group's experience, which again is like the median average for all these hikers is pretty skilled at being hikers, you know. And so, other than Yuri Doroshenko, they had a really strong team put together.
Is this a badge-worthy hike? Will they all get a
They will get an on record for this.
Yeah, an on record. That's
and we're gonna get into that here in the next thing because having talked about their experience, I want to talk about the mountainside a little bit from here. And this is kind of just to set the story for what we're about to talk about. See, because at the time of year for the route that they had picked specifically, it was extremely difficult in these winter months. It's Russia.
Wait, they were doing this in the winter?
They were doing this between, I believe, January 30th was the time that they landed at Vigy, and then they were going to come back around February 12th. So this is still, mid to late December, but they're doing this. And this particular route between Vigy and Ortorten was labeled a Category 3 hike, the most difficult one can endure. And at the time of the incident, temperatures were estimated to be between negative 12 and negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And so at night, this is really, really cold. And during the day, it's probably negative 5, like up to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, And so this is not an easy trek for people to do.
Yeah.
But
pretty cold.
They're Russians.
Yeah.
So
it's like people being from like Wisconsin. They're like, yeah, it's like negative 10 today. It's pretty warm out.
Yeah, and I look at it as being like like in Skyrim, you can be an orc, and an orc has this berserk mode where he's naturally stronger, where he can go into the super stage where he's stronger and faster. But other than that, he's just really strong, and his buffs, the things that he's really good at, are just being strong and beating the absolute Christ out of things.
These guys got buffs and cold.
Yeah, exactly. These are Russians, and so they're kind of like used to this. Not that this...
They're like, it's always cold here. This ain't nothing.
Yeah.
We prefer the cold. The ground's better.
You've seen that hat I've got, that like Russian, it's made out of sable, which is like a weasel, member of the weasel family. It's the warmest fucking thing I've ever put on my head. Like, if you had a coat with some of that in it, I don't think you could get cold.
Boots aligned with it.
Yeah, I don't think you get
I think
cold
you could
at that point.
up until a certain degree temperature.
Sure,
and then
but
you
it's
have to
like 30, 40 below, and you're maybe start to like need to worry.
Yeah, you're like, I stopped sweating. What's going on here? And so, as I said, they were expected back in Vigier around like February 12th, but only one person ended up surviving this trip. Yuri Yudin is the sole survivor of the trip, and that's only because the day after their trip had begun, Yudin had gotten severe sciatica pain, described as poor health in the official records, and had to go back, leaving the total number of hikers in the Dyatlov group at 9. And kind of an interesting little note is that from Vigier, they moved to this logging kind of settlement, kind of closer to where they were going. And the route that they had took, actually, they'd gotten picked up by a logging truck. And so it seems that Yuri Yudin, the reason that he had to stay behind was because the bouncing on the logging truck and on these bad roads like really hurt his back, and he had to go back because of that. Which is fortunate for him because
Otherwise,
shit's about to happen. So Yuri Yudin.
When did this take place?
This was
1959.
1959, yeah.
Oh shit. Okay.
And so the 12th had come and passed, and when the hikers hadn't returned, a search party was sent out to find them. And this was about a week and a half, 10 days later, February 21st. And this detail isn't really super important, is like hikes they're kind of an estimated thing, Sometimes it can take a couple extra days for people to return because they stopped at a waterfall or somebody had to slow down because of a hurt foot or something like that. And so they didn't really panic at first. So it explains this little window between when they were expected and when they sent out a search party. But what they found made this story a favorite for people who like conspiracy theories and mysteries. It's crazy. So we're going to get into what they first found, which was the tent. And this was the 26th of February when the rescue team had found the tent. It was abandoned and horribly damaged. It was found about 10 miles from their destination on the inhospitable slope of the Kholat Salik, Siakil, something like that. Kholat Siakil, yeah. In Mansi, the indigenous and ethnic and language group in the region, Kholat means dead or meager, and Siakil translates to mountain. And so their tent was found on the side of scarce or meager mountain, or you could also interpret it as dead mountain. And the reason
what did you say? Sverdlovsky Oblast?
No, that's the region, I do believe. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, and so the tent was found by a student who remarked that, quote, the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind, end quote. And this is very important. Remember that little detail.
Say that one more time.
Quote, the tent was half torn down. This is the guy who found the tent. The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. Important. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. End quote. This was the tent that...
Like they fled in the middle of the night. In their sleep.
That's kind of what it seems.
In a panic.
Like something happened, and they had to leave. And so the hikers...
How did we get back to Bigfoot?
Well, we're gonna get into that actually. So hold that thought.
Siberian tiger.
Just call it Yeti.
And so,
Yeti.
so one thing that they also found was that the hikers had taken their time to dig the snow out from this little slope that they were on in order to pitch their tent. And in doing so, this would make the wind not so brutal on them. It wouldn't blow their tent down. And this is also extremely valuable because the 5'10" tent would be exposed to all these winds. And so they had dug down almost 6 feet for the protection from the elements.
Well, it also acts as like an insulative barrier too. So in that temperature, it's like digging a snow cave, but you're just digging down a tent. So you're digging a snow cave and putting a fabric roof on it, more or less.
Well, I'm assuming...
And you would be surprised how much snow insulates. Like when you put some heat in there, just body heat of
candles.
that.
Yeah,
a couple candles and that many
We used to
people.
put a couple candles in our
Or
little
you just start a little fire to cook on and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna be nice and warm.
And so I want to show you a couple of photos I want to show you one photo from them digging out this tent site, and I'm going to show you the photo where they found the tent. And so this is them dig on the mountainside, and they are digging out the hillside in order to set the tent down. This was found on one of their camera rolls after the forensics team had kind of gone through.
They don't look like they're wearing any fur.
They don't. They look like they're wearing a lot of ski stuff, which will come in that comes into play later. And then this was the tent when they found it. Yeah, and you guys can listening at home can find these photos online. It's not really that hard to find them, and it
just looks like it was collapsed by the snow, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's an interesting sight at the very least, and that's why I wanted to show the guys here. And I'll put a tag to these up
on the mountain were they when this happened?
They were on I can't remember the exact side, but I believe it was the east side, and they were about 1.5 kilometers away. They were 1.5 kilometers southwest from a bundle of trees, from a little wood. And so when they found this tent, there was no bodies or signs of life. And an investigator said that the tent appeared to have been cut open from the inside, and that the hikers had left the tent in socks or bare feet. They'd also found 8 or 9 sets of tracks in the snow left by the hikers, either barefooted, wearing socks, and there was even one who was wearing a single shoe. Huh. And so now the case comes to there's a tent. People are cutting themselves out from the inside to escape the tent.
Weird.
And nobody knows why. What the fuck is this? And so...
Yeah, that's a kind of a trippy scenario.
Yeah, and
so, this is like the first thing that came along the path. Like they routed them, trying to find them. Like, let's follow where we think they're hiking.
Yeah.
And this is like the first...
This is the first indication that the hikers have been here.
They're like, oh shit, we found... Okay, they were on this path, but this is what we found. How far from the
summit were they?
They were only about 10 miles from the mountain Northorton itself.
They weren't even to the mountain.
No. This is on a separate
10
mountain.
miles east of the mountain.
Yeah. And so they had to cross another valley, I do believe. It's a really big fucking hike, and honestly, good on them for trying. And so
you say 10 miles east, eh? It's all woods.
It's all woods.
The whole mountain's just surrounded by woods until you get up on the higher ridges and stuff.
And that's where they were. They were on the Mount Kolat. Kholat. That's what you should search in your Google. And you should be able to see the Dyatlov Memorial on Google Maps if that's what you're looking for. But yeah, again, they had cut the tent open from the inside, and investigators found like shoe prints, but they had kind of disappeared. And so the tracks that they did follow kind of pointed in the direction of nearby woods, which is kind of what Sam was talking about. And these were about 1.5 kilometers away from the tent. But after, as I said, a little while, 500 meters, wind and snow had blown away any trace of footprints due to the severe wind and snow that can be found there.
Dyatlov Pass?
Dyatlov, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they followed the projected path of these footsteps to the trees and found a large cedar tree. Underneath the tree was the remains of a fire and the remains of the 2 hikers, Yuri Krievoshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. So
they ran like a couple kilometers from their tent.
It's from
found a tree, started a fire, and died there.
From what we can tell, everybody ran away from the tent. Like, these 2,
not wearing
as far
shoes.
as this investigation had been found, these 2 are found under a tree, and there's like a small little fire underneath the tree, and these 2 bodies.
Not quite enough.
Not quite enough.
Like no shoes, just.
Well, we're gonna get into that real quick because Yuri Doroshenko was wearing a sleeveless cotton undershirt. Short sleeve checkered shirt with all 6 buttons fastened. He was wearing shorts, swimming trunks, and cotton underwear. He was also wearing 2 different wool socks. The socks on the left foot were burned, and he had particles of moss and pine needles in his hair. and the hair on the right side of his head was burned. Doroshenko's body was described as purple-brown, and he also had a gray foam coming from his right cheek and gray liquid from his right mouth. And this could be a possible pulmonary edema, but it's kind of hard to tell due to like how far later they were discovered. The inner surface of the right shoulder had 2 abrasions with no bleeding. His right armpit had a bruise, as well as the upper third of his right forearm. His ear, nose, and lips were covered in blood, and he had bruises on his shins. His fingers and toes were severely frostbitten. Had he survived, he would have lost them to amputation. So this is the first body that's found, and next to him is Yuri Krievoshenko. And he was found wearing an undershirt and a long sleeve shirt, swimming pants, long underpants, and a torn sock on his left foot. He was found face up. It seems his cheek, ear, and skull were damaged somehow, with the medical examiner noting diffused bleeding in the right temporal and occipital region of his skull due to the damaged temporalis muscle, which is the jaw muscle. So something had hit him like near the ear and had done something to his jaw to cause hemorrhaging into his skull. And so you can find a YouTube video on the Dyatlov group, and this is where I want to swing away from like a little bit of the facts and kind of go to where like this story has a lot of mystery, because you can find a YouTube video on the Dyatlov group published by the Russian state-owned media RT Documentary is what they're called, and they've got something on the Dyatlov group entitled
Russia Today.
That's Russia Today, yeah, and it's their video is entitled "Following in the Tracks of the Dyatlov Group." Get to the truth of the Dyatlov Pass. And the experts in that kind of claim that a person was either hung from the tree over the fire, burning their legs, or somebody had set the person and the log on fire altogether. And it makes the story sound a lot more drastic than it perhaps was. Here's a direct quote from Vladimir Sungorkin, a Russian journalist, on that video talking about Krievoshenko's flesh in his own mouth. Because he was found with like the back of his hand, like the skin on the back of his hand in his mouth. But it's also like, maybe it's this next thing. So I'm going to quote Vladimir Sungorkin. Quote, "One of them had a piece of finger he'd bitten off in his mouth. It remained in his mouth. He bit his finger off. So he died. It's clear he bit his finger off because he was in agony. Otherwise, why else would you bite off your own finger? He died there as a result of his pain, and this piece of his finger remained in his mouth. We established the following. When they had analyzed the burns on his legs, they thought that he had fell and was burned. But the burn did not show this. The person was either hung above the fire, or they took a log from the fire and burned him on the cedar tree from below. Can you imagine this? It's unusual to say the least." Now, I personally think that this dude is full of shit. Doesn't really know a whole lot about the thing, other than a lot of the things that, like, because a lot of these stories get murked up. And so, like, I don't know, maybe he knows more than I do, maybe he doesn't. But, like, you don't really hear about a thumb of a person being missing in the autopsy reports. You don't hear about that being in the person's mouth at the time of, like, so it's just weird.
So he makes some, like, claim that's not supported by the autopsy information?
Yeah. And so, you know, we're going to get more into this a little bit later because a lot of people make a shitload of various claims about this incident. But right now we're going to talk about Krievoshenko's autopsy findings. His fingertips had abrasions to the soft tissue, and this could have been from like climbing the tree or gathering cedar wood. He had an abrasion to the right side of his chest and up his collarbone, light red in color. The back of his left wrist and hand had a dark abrasion. 3 linear skin lesions with straight edges and sharp corners went around the inner side of the topmost third of his left thigh. So it's like a Wolverine blade or something went through the topmost, yeah.
Say it again, though.
3 linear skin lesions with straight edges and sharp corners went around the inner side of the top third of his left thigh.
Lesions, not lacerations.
Oh, you're right. There was a dark brown abrasion on his femur and tibia. There was an almost foot-long burn on his left leg as well. So these are the 2 guys that are found under the cedar tree, and these are the states of their bodies.
So pretty much that guy's whole left side got fucked up.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what it seems. It seems like
he had abrasions here. He had something in his thighs, and the bottom was burned.
It seems like something happened to his right side, and then the things that are happening to his, or something happened to his left side, and the things that are happening to his right side are probably different from different instances.
Oh, I thought it was all down his left side.
No.
So go back to these lesions again.
Okay.
Just say that one more time for me. 'Cause
Okay.
I feel like this is going to be one of the things that stands out as being really fucking weird about the thing.
Yeah.
Why? What lesions?
Why? So
Lesions, lacerations. Okay, an animal, something scratched
That
you.
means-
Yeah,
Right.
and
But listen to the description of it one more time.
yeah, and so it says 3 linear skin lesions with straight edges and sharp corners went around the inner side of the top third of his left leg.
So long rectangle. Those are long rectangular lesions. They're parallel to each other, and they have crisp edges.
Yeah, sharp edges.
So we're not talking about. We're talking about something created. You know what I mean? Like
We could be because
nature doesn't often create straight lines and square edges.
I'm
in things like rashes.
and I'm with you. A lot of the mystery that surrounds this is just that, like, obviously from what we know now in the story, people left the tent and then got to this campsite underneath this cedar tree, right?
2 people.
2 people. We know that 2 people got there.
2 of the 9.
We have no idea what their state of thought was. We have no idea if they were within their right mind. We don't know if they were falling or fighting. We don't. We have no idea. And so that's again what makes this kind of stuff so
it's very
weird.
wide open because apparently there was 9 people in this tent hanging out, and something mysteriously happened where everybody ripped out of the tent, not wearing their fucking shoes, half of them with different socks on, going to cedar trees like 2 kilometers away and starting fires.
Well, and the funniest thing to think about this is like imagine being
Like,
the
what
investigators.
drugs did you take right there?
Yeah, imagine
Like,
being the investigators and finding these 2 people a month later and being like, what?
No, I'm
Could've
thinking
done
like
this.
the dude with the back problems was like, you know what? Fuck these guys. Sounds like fuck you bitches, making fun of
Fuck
me
you
for
guys for making me sit on the hard ass back.
no,
bench.
some other story we don't
Literal
know
logs
about
on
where
the
they said something about his wife or something like that, and he got really pissed off about it and was like, you know what, and drugged them all.
Yeah.
And they made it to about there, and then they ate their first dinner or whatever it was.
I
and
like that. That's where you go with this.
he poisoned them.
I'm already onto aliens or Bigfoot.
He poisoned
my
them.
head.
We're gonna get there. And
But
so,
it's starting to sound like fucking aliens.
I ain't trusting the guy that went back. I think he had a grudge and he poisoned the rest of the crew. They ate that first meal.
And so the
camping
next
under
thing I wanna
tent,
talk
and shit
about-
went wrong.
the next thing I want to talk about before we go to break real quick is the cedar tree, because you're going to hear me say the cedar or cedar a lot in this story, and it's because this particular tree under which the fire was made and these 2 bodies were made is a very pivotal part in the mapping of the scenario, like how things occurred. And so again, we're going to get into the cedar here. And again, Yuri and the 2 Yuris were found. Actually, there's 3 of them, but the 2 Yuris here were found under. I know it's ridiculous. We're found under the cedar, and further investigation revealed that the cedar's tree branches were broken up to about 5 meters in the air, or about 15 feet. And so the tree branches up this tree were broken for whatever reason.
Like somebody tried to climb the tree and it fell.
And this is where
Or
things.
those were the things they could climb up to reach. Like the dead branches are at the bottom.
Oh, gotcha.
This is probably a fucking big. This is a tree that you're going to take shelter under.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm assuming it's not like a little cedar tree.
Yeah.
It's a big cedar tree with big dead branches, and so they're climbing up to get the dead branches to burn.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Well,
'Cause
and
it's protected. They're in like a little
oh,
snow well.
they're nice and dry. Break off.
They're in
yeah,
like a little snow well. They've got the cedar tree over the top. of
for
them.
sure. Yeah.
There's fucking cedar boughs and things like
A
that.
bunch of widowmakers.
But they don't. They got nothing. They got nothing in their hand. They're like barefoot basically.
they're freezing cold.
Socks.
It's at fucking
and shorts.
And what we know is
and
this
cotton.
something enough to make a fire though too, because there was a fire found there. Like so they
Yeah,
started.
and
a
what we know
campfire.
later is that this had to have
A
happened.
lighter is one of the things you
That's
keep in your fucking underwear.
Yeah, we know that this had to have happened between 8 and 9 hours after their last meal, which could have been, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so all of this happened throughout the night, which we later learned. So spoiler alert to the audience.
It's probably earlier than that in the night because they're in Russia in winter. It's getting dark early.
Yeah.
You're camping. when you're out in the wilderness like that, when the sun goes down,
You do too.
your body just is like it's bedtime. There's no.
Yeah, and so the initial investigators and like the research team, or not the research, the rescue team, they found these broken branches very interesting, and the evidence suggested that they had climbed the tree for whatever reason, perhaps climbing the tree to get high so that they could find camp. However, forensic testing later revealed that traces of skin were found in the bark, perhaps indicating a frantic attempt to climb the tree. While nobody knows officially what happened, whatever transpired caused these two men to interact with the bark on the tree to such a degree that their hands were, quote, a mass of pulpy flesh. Now, this could have been a fight. It could have been the guys getting wood for their fire. I don't know.
But the forensic scientist who looked at their hands said
they had
this damage came from a lot of abrading against the bark of this tree.
That's more or less what the conclusion was. Yeah.
And cedar trees don't have the roughest bark ever, but they're not super smooth.
Yeah, it's not like
a redwood.
It's
like kind of soft and silky.
I'm starting to think that a bear jumped in their tent and they were like an angry bear was just like, motherfuckers got food and I'm taking it. Russian bear just like, I'll have to kill tonight.
Well, and it's not a regular bear, it's a Russian bear. So
it's a Russian bear.
It's still a bear and it's wintertime. What do bears do in the wintertime?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
Hibernate.
Well, I feel like it jumped in the tent and they were like, oh shit, angry bear. Ripped the fuck out that tent just like out of nowhere. They were hanging out doing nothing, had their shoes and socks off and stuff, and it was just like time to go, time to go, and they all like these two made it to that tree, and then fucking were climbing up it because Bear was like still like, oh fucking bears,
but bears climb trees. Russians know that
exactly, but
you don't outrun a bear over 2 kilometers. You don't outrun a bear over fucking 200 feet.
That's I'm like, okay, maybe the bear started retracing. It got 2 of the other guys that you don't know about yet, and then it was like, where are the other 2? What are their names?
The Yuris.
Yuris. Where are the Yuris at?
Kriegelshenko and
it was just like, and they were like, oh fuck, that bear's coming.
So.
Do both their names end in Shenko as well?
Yeah.
Oh no. This
John Smith and John Von Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why there's some mysterious anomaly happening at the cedar tree. Is like they were they couldn't.
They clearly violated the laws of Yuri. Yeah. If you put too many Yuris
in a single cluster,
dude, I swear to God, when I took gymnastics as a kid, it was at Yuri's gym.
Jesus Christ!
I just remembered that.
So, the development is the development of the tree and the breaking branches and their hands, like having been obviously forensically there, is really interesting. But all of this kind of takes a different turn looking at the Yuris when the medical examiner noticed an interesting detail. Livor mortis, which is also called hypostasis, is the pooling of blood in the body due to gravity and the cessation of circulation that comes with the heart having been stopped. So in layman's terms, it's the collection of blood at the lowest point of your body when you die. Well, both Yuris were found with hypostasis on the front of their bodies, which was not in the position that they were found. The pooling indicated to the medical examiners that the body had been turned over after death, perhaps by a person or perhaps by other means. And it is noted that some hikers were wearing each other's clothes. And I mean, it makes sense if your friend's dead, you're going to take his clothes, you know what I mean? And, in doing so, in the case that people would die face down, you might have to turn the bodies. So it's just kind of another little interesting piece to the puzzle. But we're going to have to break for this puzzle. And we'll come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about the mysterious case of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Bum, bum, bum. The makers of the Lasso Hammer are happy to introduce you to our new product, the Rugged Lasso Hammer.
With a steel-reinforced rope and a stainless steel lead-infused hammer head.
Any man who knows his way around a construction site is going to use one of these.
With high tensile strength and an aerodynamic design.
It's fun for the whole family, even the kids. And you bring it to a construction site, you're going to really nail it.
The Rugged Lasso Hammer.
Swing it.
Nail it.
Rugged Lasso Hammer. Discreet Cleaners is your choice for confidential cleaning.
We'll clean your
carpet,
room,
backseat,
or trunk,
house,
condo,
apartment,
boat, limo,
or bathtub
with stains including
blood,
brains,
guts,
bones,
piss,
shit,
vomit,
cum,
chocolate, and other stains including
dirt and mud,
wax candles,
rose petals,
broken glass, and Dear John letters.
discreet cleaners. We're here for you. Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth.
Where we teach your kids to swim through the flood and outrun the plague. We walk on water with our new core program.
We'll teach them to shoot, garden, hunt, skin, gut, and can all their own food.
T-shirts are available at sfsbfscfy.gov.
You can order the Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth manual at sfsbfscfy.gov.
Log on to the Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth to get 15% off on all tickets to all 3 days of the Christian Fest's He Is Written tour.
Solid Foundation Survival Bible Fitness Summer Camp for Youth.
Ready for revelations?
Now you will be.
We're back!
Yes,
We're back.
We are.
With Black Sheep and Bad Apples, if you guys are just joining us. I don't know why you would be joining us like a quarter of the way through, but...
If you are, we appreciate that.
Yeah, welcome.
Don't sound so like.
No,
I don't know
it
why.
just seems weird to start at this point. It's like watching a trilogy, but only watching like
the last movie.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, we're back, and we're talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident. Sean, you looked like you had a thought before we continue.
I was just thinking how you could join in now. Like, how would that even be possible in a podcast that's not actually split into segments, like part 1, 2, 3?
Well, maybe somebody's walking into the room, so... Anyway,
Okay, cool.
so we were talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident, and we were talking about some of the forensicologies, which might be a made-up word.
It's a made-up word.
That were
Forensics.
that we found. I didn't want to use that word.
I'll go with the first one.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
The
Somebody
forensicological
supports me.
evidence.
It's my podcast, Sam. We were talking about the
Apparently it's your language,
forensicology of the first 2 bodies that we found, Yuri and Yuri. Really hard to remember.
I feel guilty for laughing at these poor dead fools.
It just adds to the conspiracy of this
either
whole
chased by
thing.
aliens
Where
or
it's like, of
bears.
course, that had to be Yuri and Yuri.
Yeah, and so we're going to be talking next
Yuri.
about Igor Dyatlov, the person for which this whole thing is named. On the same day of them finding the cedar and the Yuris, this was between the tent and the woods where the cedar was. They found Igor Dyatlov, the leader of the expedition. He was found about 300 meters from the cedar tree in a pose suggesting he was attempting to go back to the tent. So he was basically laying head towards the tent. And along the same route between the cedar and the tent, they found Zina Kolmogrova, who was about 630 meters from the cedar. So she made it a little bit further away from the cedar. Like if they're both heading back to the tent from the cedar, she made it a little bit further than he did.
So we're up to 4 that went to the cedar, but 2 of them are like, fuck this shit. I'm going back to the tent.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the best guess.
That's our
That's
best guess.
what I'm like at the moment.
It
Just
could
kinda
have
like rough
and it could have been that
information.
they walked towards the cedar where they thought everybody else was going. Maybe they were late risers or whatever, and maybe they couldn't make it as far and tried to turn back to the tent and died there. Like it's
Maybe they
we're
looked
gonna
up
get into
ahead
the
and was
details
like,
a
those
little bit.
fuckers dead.
Yeah, and so
Turned around and fucking died.
Do we have any idea of what the weather was like?
we do actually.
Was there a storm going on?
So the night of February 1st, which was the night that this happened, from February 1st to the 2nd, there was no inclement weather. There wasn't a storm. There was no snow. There was no blizzard. There was nothing. And so and that's going to become an important detail later. But for right now, it just seems that people have left, and that there's.
But it wasn't like there was a blizzard also going on. There was just snow on the ground.
It was just snow on the ground.
I'm just thinking like maybe you were trying to follow somebody's tracks, but then the snow's blowing and you lose the tracks. So
And-
you decide, well, I know I can follow my own tracks back.
Yeah, and this is a really
another
windy
turnaround.
hillside, and so that could be an option.
I'll determine once we get to autopsies on these 2 bodies.
Yeah, and so Dyatlov himself was well dressed by comparison to our first 2. He had an unbuttoned sleeveless fur vest, which was it's kind of weird that it was unbuttoned, but it's it's neither here nor there. But this was also later verified by Yuri Yudin himself, the survivor, as being a jacket that he gave to Dyatlov. So there was a lot of questions as to why this mysterious jacket was there. Nobody knows where the jacket. Fucking Yuri Yudin gave it to him, and so we can eliminate that mystery already. Like, it's very easy. The guy said in like 2003 or something like that. 2003.
You like my vest? You should take it.
And so he had on the sleeveless fur vest. He had a blue sweater. He had a long sleeve cotton shirt with 4 streptocide pills in it, and these pills are commonly used to fight like inflammation associated with wound infection. He had a blue sleeveless cotton singlet. He had pants and ski pants. He had on 1 cotton sock on the left foot and a wool sock on the right foot. His watch, a Zvezda, which means star, I believe, on his wrist, stopped at 5:31. And so 5:31, and I don't know much about stopwatches around this time.
PM?
Not a stopwatch, a watch.
A watch.
But it's a
I guess it's
a
just,
wind-up watch.
It's just it's the same.
It's a spring-loaded
And so we
clockwork.
don't know if it is AM or PM.
Yeah, because it's just this. You just know based on what.
But I think the time is a good indicator for when people are sitting down for leisure time and adjusting things. And I think normally these were like 8 to 12 hour spring watches. And so we can we're working with a little bit of a window here, you know. So if it's at 8 or 5:31, and we're assuming it's in the morning, maybe that means the last time that he wound it was at 9 o'clock. You know, we can make these little time frame windows. But we're not going to get too much into that.
I gotcha.
Because
Okay.
we're going to get back into the autopsy
Leaves like a window of rational
of activity
time kind
Yeah.
of thing. Like you had to have wound this at some point, and by the time it stopped, the furthest point back could have been here.
Could have been here,
This
yeah.
is pretty much the time frame between winding your watch that any of this could have happened.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and
Interesting.
we're assuming at some point after he wound his watch, he expired, and the watch then kept ticking until it ran out.
Until it ran
Yeah.
out, yeah. So
some hours later,
between
not
this-
more than 12 hours.
if
Later.
it stopped
Yeah.
here, back it up X amount of hours before.
Right,
the-
we don't know.
Yeah.
He could have been like running and winding his watch,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, but at the
30 minutes later died from the cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least gives you a plus or minus.
Exactly. It gives us some parameters
Because
to
at
work
the
with.
very like say he wound the watch a minute before he died and stuff like that for the most extreme one way, then you can add in that much time
Well, and I
one
also-
way, and then you can also go, well, if that's when it died and he wound it exactly that much before it, then you can go that way. So you know now you have a window of like, well, between this extreme and this extreme, we can say all these events occurred.
And so I want to
Right.
actually couple that.
Right.
I want to
Right.
couple that
Right.
with the idea that, or rather with the forensic analysis. I'm not sure if I wrote this in here, so I want to put it here now. They found that all members had eaten about 8 or 9 hours before their deaths. So that is very important when we consider
so
sitting
that's what I'm
down.
like, then
and
you
doing
start
your-
accumulating
your
like the
twist
forensics,
watch, you know.
yeah, and they're
And-
like,
and
okay,
so that's just another thing to consider.
here's our extreme window, but here's what we found with this, and that's only possible with that, and you start chipping like, oh, but there was a fire, so
Yeah.
now we kind of know these couple different things. We can start narrowing the window down.
Yeah, and so we're gonna kind of step back into Igor Dyatlov and his autopsy. He had minor abrasions on his cheek, forehead, eyelids, and above the left eyebrow. He also had dried blood on his lips. Now, this could be from falling in snow, but we'll never know.
More left.
He had bruised knees, and his ankles had abrasions, which were hemorrhaging into the underlying tissue. So there's some trauma that occurred to his ankle area that was causing a lot of bleeding. And for whatever reason, it didn't break the skin too, which is a very interesting thing to kind of take in here.
Well, they don't say he has a broken bone. They're saying
Like something.
internal laceration causing hemorrhaging.
Yeah. Anyway, he had a small single incision in the lower third of his right tibia. An incision might be the wrong word, but it was like a sharp point, you know. Scratches were found on his lower right forearm and his palm. He also had bruises on his knuckles, and the bruises that were found were commonly associated with like hand-to-hand fights. And his cause of death was determined to be hypothermia. So now we've got the leader of the group. He's either come back from the cedar or he's turning back from his thing.
Got the shit beat out of him,
Yeah,
and he couldn't move until he died of hypothermia.
That's what it seems like, yeah. And again, he's He's not well dressed for at this point. What we can assume at night is -2 to -30 degree temperatures. That's like kind of the for this time of year. That's the average for that time of for back in that generation
Angry
before
Russian
greenhouse
bear.
gases. And so next we're going to talk about Zenaida Komogorova, also known as Zena, which is what we're going to call her here after.
So this is going to be the 5th person?
This is the 4th person.
1, 2. I thought we...
So we found 2 Yuris.
Oh, yeah,
we found Igor Dyatlov, the leader, and
This
now
is the other
we're
one
finding
that's-
Zena. Yeah.
An
Gotcha.
incision in his tibia.
Yeah. So Zena was found about 630 meters from the cedar, face down, with her head in the direction of the tent. She was found wearing 2 hats, a long sleeve undershirt, a sweater, another shirt, another sweater, which was torn off around the right sleeve cuff. Her clothes were inside out, which was a common tactic used to like dry wet clothing for like hikers. And it's used to dry clothing while wearing it, to wear them inside out. And so she was also found wearing cotton sport pants, regular pants, ski pants, and her feet were covered by 3 pairs of socks. And she had around 5 rubles and a military-style protective mask on her body, like on her person in her pockets.
So out of the most, she was bundled up.
Military style protective mask, like a ski mask.
I couldn't find more details on that, actually. And so
It's probably not armor. It's probably a balaclava.
I assume it's something like that. I don't assume that it's like a gas mask or something like that, because I think that would be very like that's a detail somebody would have written in their diaries, which is kind of where we're getting our timelines to tonight. Right. And so somebody would have written about something like that. And so I think you're right that it's like most likely a balaclava or maybe some like variation of that.
A ski mask.
Yeah. Some nice, real cool one.
And,
nice one.
And Zena was found with a dark red abrasion on her forehead. She had a pale gray area above the right eyebrow. Her upper eyelids had minor abrasions. She had a graze on the bridge of her, the bridge and tip of her nose. She had numerous abrasions to the left cheekbone, bruised skin on the right side of her face. Zena also had abrasions on her hands and knuckles, as well as a wound and missing skin on the back of her right hand, perhaps indicating a fist fight or them just falling down numb.
She also got slapped hard.
She also had a long, bright red bruise on the side of her lower lumbar region, indicating a blunt force trauma from something. So it's pretty interesting. There's some sort of like brute, like this with Zena.
Like
you start
something
seeing,
punched her in the back. She turned around. They went whap.
not punched though. Like this blunt force trauma is like a lot more. Like this is like a car wreck.
She had lacerations to her jawbone. Talk about the face injury again.
She was found with a dark red abrasion on her forehead. She had a pale gray area above the right eyebrow. Upper eyelids had minor abrasions. She had a graze on the bridge and tip of her nose. She had numerous abrasions on the left cheekbone and bruised skin on the right side of her face.
So hit.
Sam, you guys can't see this, but Sam is physically punching himself and then turning his face to see how.
No, definitely forehead, eyebrows, a little bit here, but like cuts, bruises here though, and nose fucked up.
Right. So hit on the one side.
No,
in
but
a fight,
like cuts on
in
this.
in your face knocks off a tree or something. This whole area is wooded.
Okay, and
just
nose.
because there was this cedar tree doesn't
And
mean
nose.
that
Okay,
only
hold on, because Sam says
got
this whole area is wooded, but I want to make something known. Is that between the tent and the cedar tree is 1.5 kilometers of empty snowland, and so it's not a woods. Zena and Igor were found in the middle of this snowbank going up back towards the tent.
And there's a lower lumbar thing going on.
Yeah. And again, she was hit with something indicating blunt force trauma. So that's not that's not a fist. That's more like being hit with a pipe or a bat or a car.
This is mostly just
or a
grassland.
Yeah, it's mostly grassland during the summer, but during this time of the year, this region is just fucking snow. Right? It's like 16 feet of snow too. It's not like a little bit.
Here's their little memorial, and then nearby are some trees.
I'm going with the angry bear thing still.
Yeah,
I think it hit like a car.
Aliens.
Yeah.
It gets you in the lumbar, and you're like, no, and it's like, well, boom, like paw bigger than your face. It's literally hitting you in
Blunt force trauma, dude.
It's literally hitting you in the front and kind of coming across one side where you
but
get
if a bear hits you with like,
and it's bruising the other side of your face.
Like bears don't punch you in the face; they just take your head clean off your body.
Yeah.
But you already got hit.
Bears maul things, dude.
Yeah, so if it
can't
came up,
outrun a bear.
if it came up with a 1-2,
there would be
if
there
was a bear attack,
lacerations.
Where
and
was
bite
the
marks.
eaten person?
Right.
No, I'm saying like.
Well, we only have 4 people so
I'm just
far,
saying,
so
like,
I'm not even convinced that we're gonna find everybody. So.
I'm just saying, angry bear, like that thing is like, oh, what, motherfucker? And boom, boom. They're just like going around tagging people, just like, I ain't eating you yet.
No.
And then
I don't know.
All right.
I'm just.
And
Gonna
it
go
seems
with
like
no.
9. It seems like 9 really experienced hikers would find a way to, like, if the bear is consistently trying to attack, like, it feels like all 9 of them could come together and kill the bear.
All right.
I mean, I don't know.
So then we roll with alien.
But it's also
Aliens.
negative 22 degrees outside or so.
Then
like,
aliens.
The bear's
yeah.
sleeping.
Yeah, bears sleeping.
Don't get up and go hunting in that
That's-
kind of weather.
Anyway,
that's true.
And so these 4 hikers that we have talked about, they were discovered February 27th. Now, this was about 2 weeks after they were supposed to have arrived. And as March 7th rolled around...
returned.
Yeah, they were supposed to have come back, yeah. And not March 7th, but March 2nd, as that kind of rolled around, and the search had uncovered the labaz, or cache, that was left behind by the hikers, they were kind of starting to piece together everything. There was, like, diaries, and they were kind of, like, piecing together things. But the story about the labaz, the cache, was that they had stopped on February 1st to drop their supplies there for storage. And this would be there for 2 reasons. The first was to lighten their load. Like, some supplies were going to be used for the hike back to Vigier, and so it wasn't necessary to bring them up to Mount Torten. And so they would drop them there because they wouldn't have to carry it more than a dozen miles back and forth. The second reason was to establish kind of a base camp, much like climbing Everest or something would work. And this was kind of where they knew that they had, like, first aid and emergency supplies and stuff. And in short, stashing their gear and supplies there was a very good idea. And so it was discovered on March 2nd, all their stuff. 2 days later, on March 4th, the autopsy of the 4 hikers revealed the information I relayed to you guys earlier. The next day, on the 5th, the body of Rustem Slobodin was found. He was found 480 meters from the cedar, covered in 50 centimeters of snow, which is like a little more than 1.5 feet of snow. He was face down, head towards the tent. Better dressed than most other hikers, he was wearing a long-sleeve undershirt, a shirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and 1 felt boot on his right foot. His watch had stopped at 8:45, and it's presumed it was about 8:45 a.m. But, you know, it's really hard to determine. He had 2 shoe insoles on his chest underneath his sweater. I'm assuming to, like, warm him up, but again, we'll never know. He had 310 rubles and his passport with him, along with a box of matches, which were all wet, with 48 remaining in the box, and 1 cotton sock. His autopsy was performed on March 8th, and the medical examiner said that he was found with hemorrhages in the temporalis muscle, again the jaw, an abrasion to his forehead, a bruise on the upper right eyelid, traces of blood discharge from the nose. His face had a lot of small abrasions and was swollen, as well as his lips.
Everybody has like street brawl. Everybody's got fucking classic. Like, look at every fighter when they walk back out of the fucking boxing
but that's
ring.
a left hooker.
Just
Somebody's whatever it is hitting the face is left-handed.
He, like Dyatlov, had bruises on both hands and knuckles, again common with hand-to-hand fighting. He had torn skin on his right forearm,
but he got hit on the right side.
and bruises on his left tibia, as well as a fracture in his skull near the ear and temple region. And it wasn't clear how these injuries happened, but the medical examiner at the time suggested that the damage to the skull was done by a blunt object. So it does seem like...
To the right side?
This was to...
Most of the damage is on the right side or like
I actually
the nose.
didn't write whether it was his right or left side, but it is his ear temple region. It's like just above his ear and just behind his
What you started with was the right
temple.
mostly.
He's got a fracture there?
Yeah. A fracture in his skull near the ear temple region.
That was the same as the other. It's like the damage is coming in on the right, which leads to me to being like, if I'm looking at you left-handed, I'm getting you in the right side.
Well, it brings up the question.
Like, you're left strong. Whatever that means. Like,
why are
I know
these
you
fucking
should be
dudes
hitting the
fighting?
face face jabs are left, body shots are right, you know, type of deal. So somebody is a good boxer at the very least.
How do we know that they're fighting each other? We don't.
No, I don't know who. Something's attacking them. They're getting damaged at
Something without teeth that it's willing to use as a weapon, without claws that it's willing to use as a weapon.
Damage is happening from some sort of thing.
Leaves weird parallel lesions. What did you say in the guy's tibia, in his shin bone?
He had like an incision or like a really sharp insertion, something like that.
Something sharp hit him in the shin, right?
It's like
which is not hard to do. I've got some dents in my shin.
Honestly, you could get a piece of ice hard enough to do something.
Like those ice boots that you use to climb ice with. They got
crampon or something.
They
But they
got
didn't
the
have
picks
any of
in
that
the
stuff
front?
on them.
No.
Oh, okay.
But though it could have happened in the tent, in his means to escape or get out of the tent,
Nice flailing. Get fucking a little tag.
But so far, nobody's got any stab wounds. Nobody's.
Yeah, and so it doesn't seem like if people were being violent, it seems like they could have had an opportunity to be a lot more violent given the terrain. So anyway, it's also noted that Slobodin was found, his body rather, was found laying in an icy bed, as they quote, which suggests that he fell where he was found while his body was still warm and like probably still living a little bit. And this heat transferred to the snow underneath, which then refroze after his death. Creating this like icy bed. It is noted, however, that the icy bed found under Slobodin may have been found at the other sites where the other four had perished, but nobody had thought to look for that. So the icy bed is just a detail worth noting.
The first one they found,
but it's the first one they found.
See, and that's where I was saying in the last one. It sounds like somebody got wounded to the point that they couldn't move, and then died of hypothermia, if you will. You know, they weren't dead when they fell. They were they got beat up so bad that they could not leave that spot. Like you got damage where you're like, and I can't move.
Well,
I mean, I don't know,
because
they're quite a distance away from either, like, if you can call them encampments, from the cedar and the tent.
Right. Hundreds of meters.
Yeah, which is like...
It's a half a mile almost.
Yeah.
Between the two
that's
things.
what I mean. Like they made it being wounded either then exhausted that's where they fell over.
Think about this. Like hypothermia causes you to
paradoxically undress.
No.
Yeah, actually it does.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that too, but I was just wondering.
But it like you start to slow.
Yeah.
And then you get tired, and then you're exhausted, and then you're death weary, and then you die.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I definitely.
Like it's that slow. So like you're hiking through this. And we have no actual records of what the temperature was there at that moment that they're traversing in ill-equipped gear through this cold. What if it snapped down to like
that's
20 below, but then the wind kicked up and the wind chill dropped to 65 below zero? You would die trying to cross your yard.
Well,
you know
what I
mean?
was going to say, though, I really like what you said is the undressing thing is actually a part of hypothermia is you feel like you're warm again. When you get so cold, there becomes a point of hypothermia, and I know this from experience with
just where you...
Like, no, you feel like you're actually on fire. You're like, man, I am sweating, and that's when you know something's like real bad. I was trained on this. Like, if you got that one friend that's like trying to strip clothes off because they're like, they were freezing and shivering, and now they're doing this, it's like, no, it's a bad sign.
Right.
Because
it's like when somebody stops
they're
sweating.
literally feeling hot from being so cold.
I honestly didn't think about that. I thought you were referring to like the need to take off wet clothes when you're like wet in the cold.
No,
but, like,
paradoxical.
Your wet clothes will kill you, and it's like it's like a paradox. Like, now you have to get your clothes off.
That's
it's like your brain literally tells you you're on, like you're heating up.
Yeah.
Right. You're too hot.
You're so cold that you're now. It's going the other way, so you will end up stripping.
But now you're really warm and tired.
Now you'll end up stripping down to stupid amounts of clothes in the middle of freezing cold temperatures.
So now we're at 6 weeks after their disappearance, and we found 5 of the Dyatlov expedition hikers.
We're still missing 4.
We're still missing 4.
Okay.
And there is just more and more fucking questions popping up. Is the further we go in the story, but as further the investigators go down the story, there's all these questions. And one of these questions is that question that you posed. Where are the other fucking 4 people? Well, nearly a month after finding Slobodan.
On a spaceship.
Okay. Now, nearly a month after finding Slobodan. So this is, let's see. This is April.
Slobodan.
Yeah, it's April 4th. They discover a place that they would later deem the den. It was May, and the snow had begun to melt when the Mansai native, Kurikov, and his dog were out looking for the lost hikers. He was on the rescue team. And he and his dog had noticed some cut branches kind of forming.
What kind of dog was it?
I don't know. I couldn't
really
tell
like
you.
dogs.
I know, I do too. I really wish that I knew what kind of dog it was. It's really sad. No, I'm not going to bring it up.
Man, it was a cool wolf dog.
Yeah, and so they had found some like cut branches kind of forming this weird like kind of trail. And it wasn't like a trail because obviously it's in the snow and it's going to just melt away. But it did lead, it was a trail enough for him to follow.
It seemed interesting.
Yeah, and so he followed this around 50 meters away from the cedar tree where he found black cotton pants which had the right leg cut off halfway down by a knife. Nearby was a young fir tree and it was missing its top. And there were cedar branches around and another piece of clothing, and so it looked like people were pulling branches from trees and stuff like that. And they also found a woman's light brown wool sweater with the right half of the sleeves cut off. So it seems weird. They find like all these like indications of sticks on the ground and sticks being pulled down, and they find a couple of clothes. And
But cut. Sticks
but
cut.
like
branches
missing-
cut.
And,
well,
and
that-
clothes missing shit on the right side, like a leg and a sleeve.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's the branches that are cut because they're kind of vague about that. But they do mention what we're about to get into that there's this theory that there was a knife there, and they keep bringing up this idea that the branches could have been cut or something like that. But I don't really see that.
Like, which two needed bandages?
I don't see you doing that with a knife.
Or what did you need to make out of sticks that you needed to cloth?
Yeah.
And because you're left-handed, you're cutting the right. I don't know.
I was just thinking.
I'm not
like,
trying to get too hard on this left-handed thing, but
I was just thinking,
it's
like,
there.
who got hurt that they need to, like, hey, you cut your pants legging off, and you use it as a bandage to, like, wrap around a leg wound that's bad.
so
like,
far nobody's got any kind of wounds that seem to require
like those
pressure.
those lacerations.
Nobody's-
or the not lacerated, the
People
lesions.
have hemorrhaging lesions, but lesions aren't like a puncture. You know what I mean? A lesion
I'm like,
is like a sore or
what's
a,
this leading
a
up to?
rawness.
Like,
Yeah.
did somebody break their leg here coming up?
If I gave you an Indian burn for half an hour, you'd have a lesion.
Racist. So when they had come through,
That's true.
When the rescuers had come through the area months earlier, they had searched this area already, but the snow had been quite deep and it was difficult to search even with their avalanche poles. But again, this was now the beginning of May, and the snow was finally beginning to melt away. So the rescue team decided to search the area again when Kurikov found the air quotes trail. He'd followed the trail into a snowdrift down a ravine 75 meters from the ravine, or from the cedar rather. The rescuers were called over to the scene and began to dig into this giant mound of snow. And under 4 meters, or about 13 feet of snow, they found branches that had been torn and or cut, and clothing that had been set on top of the sticks. This contraption consisted of 14 branches of fir, 1 birch branch, and personal belongings and clothes. And so it was kind of arranged that, like a little sitting area for 4 people, which is the exact amount of survivors we're looking for. So it indicates 4 people may have survived after the cedar branch or the cedar tree incident, whatever happened there. And interestingly enough, the branches, again, had been cut with a knife or tool, but they only ever found the sheath. They never found the knife. So and I mean, maybe it's big woods, like, could be easy to lose,
Well, 13 feet down in a drift of snow, like,
Right.
anything could have had that shit could be halfway down a mountain. Like,
Yeah.
maybe.
It could be 10 feet to the left and you'll never find it.
Yeah, and so this was like an attempt to dig into the snow by these people from the wind, much like they did with the tent. And it's a common tactic used. And it had clearly worked, at least for like a little while. And they had worked for a little while, at least, to kind of keep this little team alive. But they stood like little to no chance in the freezing temperatures, which we're going to get into a little bit later.
Even in a snow cave with 4 of them?
Even in a snow cave with 4 of them. Because again, it's negative 22 to negative 30 degrees. We don't know the winds. But we're going to talk a little bit about
like 14 feet of snow. Like you should be warm in there. Like
we're going to be talking a little bit about Kabatic winds later, and that plays a very important part in what we could be seeing here. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. But what we're going to touch on now is that they were, however, like the best dressed of everybody. And this indicated that they probably held out the longest and had retrieved their clothes from their dead friends. But their bodies weren't found in this little den, as it was labeled. Their bodies were found about 20 meters from the den, which was about 65 feet. And so the first person they found was Ludmila Dubinina. And she was found laying against a rock or ledge. So you guys here in the studio can kind of picture it. She was kind of laying with her chest up against a stone and with her face upward into basically a water feature. Like a waterfall was coming down. She could have been drinking from it when she died. Very weird position to die in. And she was wearing a short sleeve, a long sleeve shirt, 2 sweaters, and one of these sweaters was Kriegelshenko's. One of the 2 Yuris. And this sweater, the what's it called? The waistband of the sweater right here tested positive for radioactivity. We're going to get into that a little bit later too. So, and also this radioactiveness is another weird fucking piece to the puzzle. Because are bears radioactive, Sean?
Yeah, you're throwing the bear right out the window with that.
Yeah.
For sure.
kind of leaning a little heavier towards aliens with things like radioactivity.
Well, let me ask you this, Sam. Do you think fistfights are radioactive?
Oh, not in reality.
So, like, did they just end up hiking on like a weird Russian nuclear dump site or something? Like, what the fuck just happened here? Where it's
I'm assuming in 1959 that this expedition is somewhat state sanctioned, like everything.
I would imagine so.
But
Soviets
like the
are kinda good at
government
that.
didn't talk about the nuclear testing they were doing there, and now it's like they
So
did.
okay,
wanna
no,
put it on-
that's not it.
Like, what
that's not it. You'd see evidence just in the satellite terrain
and-
from today.
And again,
Yeah.
like, the entire place is not irradiated.
Mm-hmm.
It is the waistband of a sweater found on a dead woman in a small creek that is irradiated. So that's something we
just the waistband of her sweater.
just the waistband. So it's a really interesting twist, and we have to consider that when we look at like nuclear test facilities.
Okay. Let's get to the injuries.
Yeah, and so from her autopsy, most of the soft tissues around her eyes, nose, eyebrows, and left cheek were missing, partially exposing bone. And again, this is 3 months or so after she allegedly died.
She was
or
the
around
only
time of
one
her
in
death.
running water, though.
She was the one in running water, yeah.
So she didn't freeze.
She was trying to drink the creek.
She probably froze to death. But
No,
hold on.
She might have died from hypothermia, but I'm saying she didn't freeze solid like the other ones because they were buried in snow.
This is something you can argue because at the time that they died, that creek might not have existed. It might have been a little trickle underneath all this snow.
Right.
But they might have been standing in just a small little divot inside the hillside.
Right.
So it's hard to kind of like parse.
Right. Because it's been now it's March.
Now it's May.
May.
It's May.
Okay. We're well into spring.
Yeah. Like done past spring. This is when they find these people. And so again, most of the soft tissue around her eyes, nose, eyebrows, and left cheek were missing, partially exposing bone. Her eyes were missing. Her nose cartilage was described as, quote, broken and flattened. Her upper lip and tongue were missing as well. She had 4... So the thing about like all this missing stuff is that like this is the time where animals are starting to move around. So some of this could be explained by either natural decay or by scavengers or creatures coming.
Raven could do that.
Exactly. And so we can't be sure of what's going on here, but we know the forensics, and that's all we know.
It seems weird that they would do that if her face was in water when they found her. Like a bird wouldn't stick its head underwater.
And I don't know that she was underwater. I know she was leaning against the water feature.
Okay.
So I think at some point the water was spilling over her, but I don't think her face was underwater at the time of them finding her.
Okay, so this could be explained by scavengers.
Yeah. And so
the tongue thing's weird.
this can't be explained by scavengers, though. She had 4 broken ribs on her right side and 6 broken ribs on her left side. She had a hemorrhage of her heart's right atrium and a bruise in the middle of her left thigh.
Jesus.
So when we think about fist fighting and we bring this to the table, the Hulk is the only person that has fists that could do shit like that.
No, but like, I mean, okay, it's a female. How tall is she? You know, how much does she weigh? Maybe she's a little on the smaller side. I mean,
She is on the smaller side,
a big male adult human who was strong could easily deliver that kind of damage to somebody.
But it also looks
not
like
necessarily with their fist.
it looks like a singular action, though.
Okay.
This wasn't
She
multiple.
fell off of something.
She
fell down something.
She fell something hit her. Like, it's hard to explain.
That would explain, like, falling face first onto a rock, but then how did she get to the thing? How did she move? Does it seem like she moved after sustaining those injuries?
It does seem that way. It seems that she moved after sustaining those injuries and
that she was walking around with no fucking eyeballs?
Yeah, she was walking around. Well, we don't know, but it seems like she was walking. It seems like her and these other 3 people we're about to talk about were a small crew together, and this was their final moment. And so it seems like
they found everybody.
They found
all together.
Everybody here in the ravine at this little water feature we're talking about that turns into a creek is where we're finding everybody else. We're just going through Ludmila right now, and so again she had a hemorrhage to her heart's right atrium, which is typified by broken ribs.
Right.
And
the rib separated from her sternum and punctured the pleural cavity.
We can definitely gather, though, that the group split up into 2 separate groups.
Yes, they split up into 2 separate groups, but we don't know if they split up due to people dying or going missing. We just know that these
for
4,
whatever reason,
or they got literally just got separated in the dark.
5 of them went to one spot and the other 4 went to another spot.
Yeah, and it seems like these 4, because they had enough intentionality and enough time to dig out their first little den area, and then to move further beyond that, to go and explore, if you will. It seems like they were doing pretty okay for at least 20 minutes. You know, they were finally warm. So Alexander Kolevatov and Semyon Zolotaryov were found embracing each other in an almost spooning fashion. Some thought that Zolotaryov could have been carrying Kolevatov, but it could be that Semyon was trying to keep Alexander warm. It's kind of hard to determine. But we're going to talk about Semyon Zolotaryov. He was the most experienced of all these hikers. And he was wearing a coat, a sweater, a long sleeve, a scarf, 2 hats, ski pants, 2 pairs of regular pants, and some underwear. So he was like...
No boots.
He had handmade leather shoes and some socks on. And these handmade leather shoes have a specific name. I think they're called Validencia or Valenka or something like that. They're a Russian type shoe that's actually designed for this type of stuff. It's not designed for long trek hiking, but it's designed to be walking around in the snow with. So he's probably, I would argue, probably one of the best dressed.
Right.
Yeah. And he's one of the only 2 hikers to have been wearing shoes. So that's pretty important. Well, it's not important in regards to where we're going with the story, but it's important to note because he was either wearing shoes when it happened.
Was he one of the more experienced ones?
He was the most experienced.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and so in his pockets, and they call it pocket litter. They found some newspapers, some coins, a compass, and a few other items, and one of those was a camera. He and the camera had spent nearly 3 months underwater at this point, but we'll get to that a little bit more later, because they kind of use. Well, we're not going to get to this part actually later, but some of the film that they found, they used to kind of justify the UFO idea. And so, Sam, I know you like to search things on your phone while we do podcasts. Go ahead and look at Dyatlov UFO photos. And again, they're there. They are photos that were found at this scene. I think it's just corruption of the film. I'm not going to tell you all what to believe listening, but it's something interesting. But it's also interesting because some people use the idea of this camera as evidence of a quote secret camera taken on the journey by Semyon, perhaps indicating him being like a covert operative. But again, this is kind of speculation. This is like kind of hearsay. Excuse me. The autopsy of Semyon Zolotaryov showed that his eyes were missing, as well as soft tissue to the bone around his left eyebrow. He had an open wound on the right side of his skull with exposed bone. He had what's described as a flail chest, associated with his 5 broken ribs. So a flail chest is more or less when it breaks away from your sternum, but also breaks. Mm-hmm. So your bone is now just a floating rib that is unattached. So I'm going to use the online health encyclopedia of the University of Rochester Medical Center to describe this a little bit more here. Quote, flail chest describes a situation in which a portion of the rib cage is separated from the rest of the chest wall, usually due to a severe blunt trauma, such as a serious fall or a car accident. This affected portion is unable to contribute to the expansion of the lungs, which creates some obvious problems for the patient, like hampered breathing, and can contribute to some not so obvious ones. Flail chest is a serious condition that can lead to long-term disability and even death. So Semyon Zolotaryov has whatever did this to him, broke 5 of his ribs with enough impact that it can be described as a fucking car accident.
All I can think of right now with all the blunt force is like an avalanche happened. Like something hit him so fucking hard.
There'd be massive evidence of that.
Yeah,
well, and they didn't really find any evidence of that too.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's something like that. That
and
makes
also,
sense.
if you look like
the
at
photo
the topography, there's no way, they're not anywhere near a place where an avalanche would hit them.
And also,
they're in the middle of this big open, like imagine this, it's like an open valley that's rising one direction, hemmed in by 2 little cliff lines, and there's some sparse trees, and then on top of either of those cliff lines is like dense forest, but they're in a big open area, and there's some rocks.
Well, and I also want us to consider that like that's the topography of the region as it looks, and that things can be deceiving, you know what I mean? And so like,
well, I mean, on a topographical map you can see like
you can see the slopes and stuff like that. Yeah, but we'll get into that later. But the point that I want to address now is that like obviously some huge force did something to at least 2 of these people, to Semyon and to Ludmila, who have both been shown to have like extensive, like just some of the most massive injuries a human body can take. And so again, these guys had their severe rib fractures, and the early Russian investigation said about both Dubina and Zolotaryov's injuries, quote, "These wounds, especially appearing in such a way without any damage to the soft tissue of the chest, are very similar to the type of trauma that results from the shock wave of a bomb," end quote. Did you hear that, Sam? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it seems like again, we don't know. So the story so far is something happens at the tent, everybody escapes to the cedar, people try to go back to the tent, they die along the way, and then these people are either hit with like a bomb or something. Like it's the series of events are wild to go through. It is an interesting thing. But we're just going to go to our next our next person found, which was Alexander Kolveatov. And he was the guy who was being held by Semyon. So he was the guy who was basically the small spoon in the cuddle. And he had an unzipped ski jacket on. He had a fleece sweater, a regular sweater, a long sleeve shirt, as well as a sleeveless undershirt. The ski jacket had a large hole that was burnt at the edge. He was also wearing canvas pants, ski pants, light pants, and shorts, and his feet had fire-damaged woolen socks. So again, we've got another foot or feet with, or at least the socks with fire damage. And his sweater, waistband, and lower pants were tested positive for radiation as well. Sam, you look like you have some thoughts going around.
Oh, I got lots of them.
You and your mustache I can't take seriously anymore. I don't know if you guys listening don't know, but if you've ever watched The Gangs of New York, the guy named the Butcher, like the villain guy, Sam has got the same mutton choppy mustache beard thing going on right now, and it is very funny to watch him have emotions.
It's extra sexy.
It's sure. So in Alexander Kolyav's pockets were a key, a safety pin, and some blank paper, and 2, quote, packages of pills, soda, and codeine. And he also had some soaked matches. He had tissues around his eyes and eyebrows missing. His skull was exposed, and he had an open wound behind his ear, and it was kind of like his wound was fairly small, but he had this deformed neck, as they described, and water-laden fingers and hands. And so this deformed neck could have been because he was like in the water for such a long time, or it could have been because he like something happened to him. Like, we don't really know. But when they found him, his neck was deformed and just in all sorts of like twisted fashion, very strange. And so the third person they found was Nikolai Tibo Brigno. And he was the second person to have been lucky enough to be wearing shoes. They found him wearing the perfect shoes for the Russian cold, some Velinkis. Actually, both of them were wearing Velinkis. And underneath these felt boots were woolen socks. The rest of his body was wearing several layers: ski pants, regular pants, sweatpants, and underwear, as well as a fur jacket, an inside-out woolen sweater, and a shirt. In his right pocket were a pair of woolen gloves, 3 coins, and some paper and a comb. On his left arm, he wore 2 watches. One of the watches stopped at 8:14 and the other at 8:39. Autopsy showed that he had a severe blow to the left side of his skull, which left multiple fractures behind the temple up towards the top of his skull. He had a bruise on his lip and a, quote, hemorrhage on the lower forearm, size 10 to 12 centimeters. Those are the dimensions. So it's 10 inches by 12 centimeters, 10 centimeters by 12 centimeters. And so there's thousands of fucking questions that we have for all these fucking people that died in this thing. The official record states that 6 of the 9 people had died of hypothermia, and the other 3 had been killed by physical trauma caused by a, quote, compelling natural force. And of course, many people choose to see things differently, building their own narratives along the way. So, after this break, we're going to get back into discussing some of the theories about what happened here at Dyatlov Pass.
Oh, I've already got it all figured out.
I'm sure you do, Sam.
But it'll have to wait until after the break. Dun dun dun.
Dun, 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 dun. Break. With our new patented deep seed sowing technology and nutrient injection technology, we'd like to introduce you guys to the Vibe Aerator.
Yo, have you ever checked out the Vibe Aerator? It turned my dusty, dry lawn into a luscious, green, fertile bush in need of whacking.
You see what it does? Is it pushes juice deep down into your soil while laying as much seed as possible. In fact, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm going to go over to my friend Carlos, Texas Ranger over here. Carlos, what's been your experience?
Why, howdy, y'all. I can tell you firsthand my Mexican get his job done way faster. He went from Slowpoke Rodriguez to Speedy Gonzalez real quick. Go ahead, Jose. Tell him about that Vibe Aerator. My name is José. Bueno, pues cuando me recogieron en el Home Depot, me lo robé y quedé con el dinero de mi jefe, pero esa cosa jale bien chido. Ya le dije a todos mis friends, tapero chingón, Aerator. Gracias.
So you heard it first from Mr. Jose and Mr. Carlo. So you heard it first from Mr. Jose and Mr. Carlos, Texas Ranger. You can find this thing not just here on your radio or here if you're watching this on TV, but you can find this at Home Depot. In fact, I'd like to invite my friend Nick back here. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, the Vibe Aerator. It's fertile, it's lush, it's green, it's bush.
You want to make your land fertile? You penetrate it deep using the Vibe Aerator.
Vibe Aerator. Vibe Aerator.
Vibe Aerator.
Vibrator.
Ya me van a dar los pinches 20 bolas, güey, ¿o qué?
Shut up.
¿Sabe?
Hayfields is also clean, from farmyards to outhouses, barnyards to bedpans.
Are highly skilled. Start over. I'm sorry. Just tried to change up the accent.
Hayfields is also clean, from farmyards to outhouses, barnyards to bedpans.
Our highly skilled team of shit technicians are specially trained to handle all your fecal phenomena.
We'll be there to wipe your property clean.
Hayfield is also clean. We literally take your shit.
This week's episode of Black Sheep and Bad Apples was brought to you by cryptozoologists everywhere. Cryptozoologists. Facts.
And we're back! Well, I'm back.
I'm also
we
back.
are also back.
I just sat down.
Yeah, Shawn just sat down.
How's everybody loving their new custom-made Sam's fantastic seat pads?
Oh, actually,
ASS memory.
it sounded like you were making something up, but Sam is actually not making something up. He cut apart a memory foam mattress, I believe it was.
Yes, I have a new mattress in my house, and I have destroyed the old one.
Yeah, and so he has provided us with much comfort.
Ooh, my
on
cheeks feel so nice.
These hard office chairs.
Yeah, so look for that on YouTube later in the.
He's got
season.
a Geocity site.
ASS memory brought to you by Fourth Corner Studios.
They're
Well, anyway,
already stealing my ideas.
So we were talking about Dyatlov, Dyatlov Pass, and the Dyatlov Pass incident. So where do you guys land on the story so far? Because I know that there's a lot of theories you guys have been pitching. Shawn, I'm going to ask you first. What do you think is the most likely scenario here? Because we're going to go through some of the scenarios that are proposed, but where are you at?
I'm lost in this blunt force trauma stuff. I'm like, okay, party had some crazy shit going on. They split up into two little rallies that are approximately how many meters apart from the first tent to the
from each other.
from the other little campsite from the last
the tent
floor.
to the cedar tree is about a kilometer and a half.
But from the other little encampment
From
of the
the cedar
floor.
tree.
From the cedar tree to the ravine where they found the last four was about 75 meters or so.
Right.
From
so that's all right about there.
From the what?
More or less, it's from the cedar tree.
So we're talking how many meters from the first tent to the
So from the
ravine?
tent to the cedar, or from the tent to the ravine would be approximately a kilometer and a half plus 65
Okay.
meters.
Okay.
Yeah, it's they went further away from the tent
Yeah.
than the cedar tree.
Yeah.
Whereas
like
some
this-
of them seem to look like they were going back to the tent.
Yeah.
They all have.
So they got like a kilometer and a half between the two groups, roughly, somewhere in there, and they all got blunt force trauma.
Well,
Are missing, like-
4 or so of them have that, but all of them have injuries. To
Okay,
various
yeah.
degrees.
So they all got injuries.
All of them have injuries typical. Like, all of them have bruised on their knuckles.
No, there's 2 or 3 of them that have knuckles
It's
that are
kind of
bruised.
a half and half thing. It seems like.
And the bruised knuckles could be falling in the snow because they talk about abrasions on the knuckles. Now, snow when it forms is ice, and ice crystals are basically small stones, and so
Right.
there's a lot of
We're all
abrasion that
familiar
can
with
come.
ice.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Type of
abrasion
water.
that can come from falling. So like we can't determine whether it was
True, but
combat or not. You know.
I did like
Right,
the bomb thing that you threw in. I guess that kind
the
of threw me in
the
like
burns,
like
the
weird burns
the
on
way that
only
the
specific
symmetrical nature of the injuries.
burns on one side and mostly just like feet and up to knees area of burns, but then bruising on more so one side than lacerations on the other side. The shockwave kind of thing. I'm almost like, was there Russian bombing testing going on. Where
So you're
they were kind of
in the realm of the Russian
maybe
bomb.
you made a tent there, we made a tent there. We split 4 and 5. It was supposed to be 10 people, but one bailed out. So it would have been a tent with 5 in it and a tent with 5 in it, where they're not too far apart. They're kind of working in like a couple groups coming down the thing, but like whatever and stuff. And then something fucking boom.
Something happened. Yeah. So Sam, so Shawn, you're kind of like. That military bomb test sounds like it could be a thing. That's kind of where you're leaning.
Up in some place and nobody knows what's going on, this and that. They're testing out fucking bombs. They drop some. They're like, it's out in the middle of nowhere, just like we test shit in the desert and stuff like that. They're like, oh, we got Russian terrain, and I don't know, something, whatever hits.
All right. Well,
bombs leave craters.
Yeah,
that's the only problem I got with it. Yeah.
Bombs leave evidence of explosives. Bombs leave shrapnel. If a grenade went off next to these people,
you'd be able to tell.
There would be
so where do you stand on
multiple
this,
lacerations.
Sam?
So the things throwing me off, the things that I'm like just aren't fitting into like your typical
it's hard to put it into a box.
Tragic mountain scenario.
Yeah.
The radiation.
Oh yeah.
The radiation on not everywhere, not on everybody's clothing, just on some people's
What was it,
clothing.
2 people that had it on a waistband?
I believe it was either 2 or 3 people that had it, and again, it was like the waistband and like the bottom of the pants. So it's
maybe a third of the group had.
But it was what they found was that it had been irradiated to the point where it had a radioactive signature of its own, but they didn't find like uranium.
They didn't
present.
find anything like that.
They were only finding radioactive high energy particles.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
And that's all we can say about the thing. Right. It's so weird. Yeah.
And so that's odd. The fact that there's like the eye injuries. The one group where they're missing. They're missing.
One person was missing their eyeballs.
No, there's I believe 3 people
were missing their eyeballs
yeah.
and chunks of their face and stuff. One woman looked as if she was smashed in the face and was missing like
a lot of face injuries.
The like
face injuries,
massive chest trauma.
It's a hard puzzle to piece together.
Face injuries,
direct energy
chest trauma, and slightly burnt feet.
So do you have any?
See, none of that makes sense because if it was some sort of energy weapon, let's just fucking go aliens all the way. If it was some sort of energy weapon, there's a bunch of snow there, right?
Yeah.
So they would have.
How are we not?
They would have to. It would vaporize all the water too, right?
In order to irradiate an area, yeah, it would have to.
Like
do that.
it would create a massive amount of heat in a small area or something like that, and maybe not.
Maybe they were getting beamed up, and
but
then
like
they
where did the
gave
burns
up,
come from, right? Like
they gave up half the way. They were
there is a fire,
they're
so
fucked.
like there is like the
chance that the burns are from just being too close to the fire, but
a little campfire, one little campfire,
right?
I don't know, but. So, do you have an official like position that you want to take before we continue? We're going to kind of cycle through our theories that have been presented. So, do you have anything that you subscribe to in particular before we move on?
I just don't know enough,
and it's just.
And I feel like that's where this story kind of ends: is that we just don't know enough.
Wizard
Yeti,
Yeti,
such a great mystery, and such a great
creature,
conspiracy theory.
So, first of all, we're going to talk about foul play, and some of the people. So some of the people see this case as a case of foul play, and they blame very confusingly either Kriegelshenko or Kolatov or Zolotaryov or all of them for transporting radioactive like isotopes. There's this idea that these guys were working for the CIA, one or all of them. And the theory states that basically something went wrong during this exchange and combat ensued. They were working kind of with like the CIA or the KGB or something like that, doing like this exchange of information or what have you. And it's kind of a flimsy story without much merit, truly it's impossible to know. You know, we don't see any footprints in the forensic analysis of the scene. We don't really see any of that, and so it just kind of leads us to this dead end theory. And also, out of these 3 suspected agents, only Kolyatov had radioactive clothes. And so if all of them were agents, or one of them were agents, you would expect like the radioactivity to be just prevalent over everything. And so it's not really a solid...
Oh, because the one person had the radioactive sweater on, but it wasn't hers, it was the other person's.
Yeah.
Right. And then his clothes were also radioactive.
Yeah, and so it kind of lends itself to that idea, but also, like, if there were agents or a meeting, like, why did these people want to get themselves out of the tent? Where are the other footprints?
The level of fear indicated by how ill-prepared they were for going outside the tent, seemingly, because they all fucking, more than half of them succumbed to hypothermia, right?
Yeah, 6 out of the 9, allegedly.
Right.
Yeah.
So...
I still say that guy with the back injury that didn't go up, poison the rest of them. That's the real winner. And it just went way crazier than he was like, oh, they're just all going to die in like 24 hours. But no, like they actually like went nuts in their minds and then died.
It doesn't account for the injuries.
Yeah, it doesn't account for the injuries. And also, like, a lot of people have like this theory that Zolotaryov had a secret camera, which was the one that was found in the creek. And it's just like, I don't know, it seems kind of far-fetched, and there's not a whole lot of evidence tying it together.
But the photos that they did get off it, like people would have noticed him with the camera.
Yeah, it's not a small camera. It's not a spy camera, which was available at this time.
Yeah, but people were looking at the camera.
Exactly.
In some of those photos, like.
So the next theory we're going to get to is a theory that has been entitled fugitives. And it's basically summarizing that soldiers came into the area, and the soldiers were either looking for people or they were there for a specific reason, which could have been that the people of the Dyatlov group had seen something they should or shouldn't have seen, and that they could have also been mistaken for fugitives. But the soldiers basically had done something to these people, and that's what caused like the entire offense. And the reason that
soldiers shoot people.
Yeah, and the reason for this is that they discovered a piece of art, like an article of clothing with an insignia from a certain type of army regiment. And they were like, this is weird. They found this amongst the cache here at Dyatlov Pass. And not the cache, but the evidence. And they were saying that like people don't really have this unless they're in the military. But you can also kind of take that with a grain of salt, because like Yuri Yudin, the only survivor, he was the only person that said that he didn't see that piece of clothing beforehand. And this could be explained because like soldiers in the early and like certainly soldiers in the early 40s who later became eventually prisoners used this insignia. And this insignia, this patch later, quote, disappeared from the evidence room. But it's easy to think that maybe Zolotaryov, a latecomer to the trip, like he had arrived at the very last moment to get on this trip. Maybe he had brought some items Yudin didn't see or he didn't remember. Like it's kind of hard to argue the fugitive thing because it's based on such flimsy evidence and there's no like footprints or anything. So the fugitives thing is kind of a weird take on the whole thing.
Grasping at straws.
I think so personally. And another theory is that the indigenous peoples there, that we discussed a little bit earlier, the Mansi, had moved into the region to attack these travelers. However, when you know their name for the mountain, Death or Scarce Mountain, it's easy to surmise that they didn't go there during this time of year because it probably didn't have anything worthwhile for them to hunt. And it kind of just... This theory appears to be like a flimsy way to pin this thing on an indigenous people. And there's no evidence that they ever were there. And the area wasn't particularly special to the Mansi either. It had little game on it, and there was like plenty of other land that was more abundant with resources. But again, like people also are like, well, the Mansi tried to rob them, but none of their belongings were gone, and so that story doesn't hold up at all. It's honestly just racism. Yeah. And another one of these is we've talked about a little bit tonight: a fight, like a physical altercation. And it seems likely that maybe that happened. Like, I personally don't think it did, but it seems like the evidence doesn't rule it out. You know what I mean? With both Igor and Xena having injuries to their fists, like there's like a slight amount of evidence indicating combat. There's no real motive.
But like fighting, but fighting not themselves, but fighting something.
Something else.
And it lends itself
like,
to the CIA
whatever
thing.
it may be and stuff like that. It's like there's an anomaly that, yeah, they may have had a struggle, if you will. They put up a fight for a second in one way or another. Each one fended for their life, if you will.
Yeah.
And that means that there's something that they're fending against.
And like, why would somebody climb a tree?
And that's all I can really kind of put at it. It's
yeah,
like, I don't want to define it too much, but obviously they were fending for their life in one way or another.
Two dudes that tried to climb the tree so manically that they destroyed the skin on their hands doing so.
And they left their tent to begin with without fucking all their clothes.
Is so fucking weird.
Well, in one interpretation of them getting their hands that like roughed up from pulling tree branches down, one rationality that I've had is that like somebody had to climb the tree. Climbing trees with numb hands is not an easy task. But then your other job is to break these branches down for somebody else to build a fire. I could easily see somebody climbing a tree, not frantically, but perhaps frantically, because it is negative 22 or ish out. I could see somebody climbing a tree and getting those same wounds, not from climbing the tree frantically, but from vigorously trying to like pull branches off of a tree. And so it's kind of a hard thing to delineate. I personally lend myself more to the idea that a person had to climb the tree to get wood for the fire.
But just the fact that they left the original tent with most of them didn't have most of their clothes on like they should have and stuff. Like the first, 60% or whatever of them, the 5 out of the 9, left without even shoes on.
Right.
Which meant that there was a hustle going on. And this is where I kind of lead back to this, like, fending for your life. Maybe they made it out of there was a situation that made them all have to frantically leave.
They cut their way out of the tent.
They frantically leave and leaving their possessions. But whatever you got on you right now, while you thought you were in the humble of a comforting, like, we're chilling out for the night. You're getting comfortable. You're taking your shoes off. You got your different random each person's clothes on because of what you feel comfortable in. Each person is a little different, but you settled in. You settled in, and then something broke in and then made you frantically go from that spot to another spot and then fend for your life.
And that kind of leads us into our next theory, because hallucinogens could have played a part.
This is where I was going with
because some of these theories go back to like this kind of like espionage thing that was happening during this Cold War era, and it basically
when they were doing all that LSD testing and
what were they eating? What was happening with something? That's where I kind of brought up the like, the guy on the truck that didn't go with must have drugged him, like they hit the bread thing with some LSD or something, like some weird. What's up with that dude?
They would be able still with tests, you'd still be able to find evidence of that.
But that's all I can think of.
Especially if they died and their system stopped working. So it's
but that leaves me then next to the blunt force trauma. Is like maybe they did all hallucinate for some reason. It got too hot, just even like hypothermia. That's where I was like, maybe some weird random cold spell where it went from -10 to like negative actually 50, where they were all like cool for a second, and now that they're getting comfortable, they just got fucking chilled like no other.
Why did they leave the tent?
Then why? Then now they're like, I'm too hot.
They cut their way out of the tent.
There's something to be said about the theory of hallucinogenics, because there are people out there in the world that think like either somebody in the group gave everybody drugs, or they grabbed, like, they picked up drugs. And that this could also be like a new secret untested like Soviet Union drug or whatever. But some people think that it also was the fly agaric mushroom that they picked up, that maybe they had carried with them, which would explain like some dry socks that were carried around that were basically empty, but they weren't paired together, they were just regular socks. And so it could be that they ate
Went up
fly
on the
agaric mushrooms, which
snowy mountain and ate the Alice in Wonderlands. Like,
well, and you have to dry fly agarics in order to not eat the toxic parts of them. And so at the beginning of this trip, feasibly somebody could have found them, pocketed them, to keep them dry them out, and they could have had a fun night tripping or whatever. I mean, I don't think that's what it was.
well, and that's
It
what I
doesn't
was.
sound like something that like people who were trying to go on an expedition to the top of a mountain
Yeah.
in winter in dangerous. It's already a dangerous thing to do. You don't add the
Wait, so the
the
dude,
professional thing to do.
the
isn't to
dude
eat
with no
mushrooms.
badges was on the trip, right? He wasn't the guy that went back on the truck with the back problems.
I don't think so.
Okay, so that's all I was gonna. Is like maybe the dude with no badges was like, "Yo, you want to eat some drugs?"
So
Like
then-
they're really all the way down. It was like, "Yo, I'm about to get my first badge. You want to get high?"
So the next leg
I'm
of
not
this
feeling that one
this
either.
theory is
Yeah.
is Sam, you mentioned earlier, a Sasquatch or a Yeti. And there's
Yeah,
I'm
Yeti.
going to show you guys here in a second, but there's a grainy photo of the supposed Yeti that is theorized to have attacked them. It's not conclusive, and it's a photo of either a silhouette of someone wearing like a dark jacket, or it is in fact a Yeti. The camera is focused on the snow collected on a tree trunk nearby, and in the background, unfocused, is the dark silhouette jacket Yeti thing. And it's a bit creepy to look at, and to imagine it being a Yeti or a Bigfoot is again kind of creepy. But regardless of what you think of this amazing mythical creature, I don't think this photo is exactly evidence of a Yeti. So I'm going to show it to you, Sam, and I want you to tell me what you think, first of all. Describe what you're seeing for the audience.
I mean, it's a snowy forest. There's snow blown against the trees. You can see clearly the path that someone had walked through the snow. And then further back, a little out of focus, looks like a person walking through the snow towards the camera. It doesn't look like... It doesn't look bigger than, like it's not like much bigger or wider than the track that it's standing near and on.
So would you say that this is probably more likely a human being, possibly part of the group?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be my guess.
Yeah. What do you think, Sean? Describe what you're seeing.
Oh man, that's definitely like snowy forest. A lot of snow. That's like a good snowy forest. Snow up to obviously the apparent in the center fold of the picture, a being. Let's start with that. A being with snow, not one leg, I'd say up to the knee, one leg below the knee by 3-4 inches. So it's up to knees in patches, we'll say. Snowy forest.
What do you think that looks like a Yeti, perhaps, or do you think it might be a person in?
Looks
I don't
like
know,
a
we'll
very-
say ski
I'm like it looks like
Does that look like a furry animal to you?
it looks like a furry being. I'm like, there is a lot of shag.
Let me see. Let me look back.
Like that person's got a lot of gear on. Like I'm trying to be warm.
The uniform nature, the line where the tone of the whatever silhouette changes, you can see where the pants are darker than the jacket top is. They're wearing a hat. You can see the little.
They
the way the
almost
hat-
look like the thing that makes this photo
it's
like a
definitely
little bit
got
creepy
the like,
is that
oh, you took a photo of me. Look, like like you could have surprised your friend. You're like, oh, you.
It's just a weird body position.
And I think the thing that makes it look creepy is that the thing is holding onto the tree next to it,
Right.
Which makes it look like it's lumbering towards you. But in reality, it's probably just somebody trying to
Not fall over in the snow.
Not fall over in the snow.
Right.
Yeah. So that's another theory, is that a Yeti attacked them, which, if Yetis are as strong as we think, it might explain some of the traumatic injuries.
I like the Yeti theory. I'm running with that.
But we're going to go on to some more theories because we got a couple left. Infrasound, and this term was popularized in the book, in the 2013 book Dead Mountain. This theory, rather, by Don Iyashar, and the theory posits that a Kármán vortex street is what he describes it as, caused infrasound. And I'm no scientist, and I don't know much about this, but according to the theory, these type of vortexes can produce kinetic winds, which is like a downward push of strong winds. And in this case, the winds could have caught the slope, emitting an infrasonic sound. And infrasonic sound is the kind of sound that you can't physically hear, but makes you panic and terrified. And so it's an interesting theory, because if these winds had been strong enough over the mountain slope to create these sounds, it could have scared the actual shit out of everybody. And this could explain why the tent was so suddenly cut open from the inside, and this could have been caused by panic, but it doesn't explain the traumatic injuries.
So the police in New Jersey use that infrasound stuff in their sirens. And when they go by, it doesn't matter if you're on the 5th floor or right outside on the street or getting pulled over by them. It makes you want to hide.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make you want to
flee.
Like if you were out in the open, but if you were in a tent, you wouldn't want to go outside where that sound was. You'd want to stay inside the tent.
Yeah. And so the next theory we're gonna go across is the secret missile / missile launch theory. And again, we're getting into kind of the conspiracy theory aspect of the events. And it's kind of these theories develop. They always run into the same course. And the same thing that these theories in particular run into is they're always missing a fucking detail to explain the actual story.
Like the crater or the shrapnel?
Exactly. And so an interesting story is that the Dyatlov Pass party were within the path of a parachuting mine, causing an explosion. And this explosion could be the shockwave that caused the broken bones. And there are reports that there were, in fact, parachute mines being tested in the area around the time, and the presence of these bombs could be the reason that they had cut themselves from their tent, why they had broken bones and burns on them. And these mines detonate in the air rather than on the ground, so they maximize full effect. And so this is one of the theories, and a similar yet different theory was that a secret missile test had exploded overhead or nearby or whatever, frightening the hikers and so on and so forth. And there's little evidence to explain a rocket explosion over the area, and it seems kind of far-fetched because there was no explosive parts found. There was no rocket pieces found anywhere.
The trees weren't fucked up like
the
rockets
trees weren't fucked
exploding.
up. Yeah. And so there's also another similar but different theory, and that's the testing of radioactive weapons, and a rocket exploding, blah blah blah, could have left radiation, blah blah blah. But
it would have been everywhere.
It would have been everywhere. And so that leads us to aliens. Aliens is another theory.
The only thing so far that really would just stitch this whole thing up
is aliens.
Neat.
Yeah.
Real neat. Because you're yeah, they got weird tech. They could do all that stuff.
Yeah, and that's why we're not going to go into that too much tonight, because you could rationalize that in so many different ways that I think it's almost unimportant for us to kind of cover that here. I just think that the amount of radiation they would emit would be the same amount that you would find from some sort of test. So there's kind of I don't know, it seems much more far-fetched. And obviously you can create any alien scenario to fit it into this thing. So again, we're just going to kind of skip over that tonight, just because we got other things to talk about. The other thing I want to talk about is avalanches, the idea that an avalanche did it. So initially, an avalanche was looked at by the Russian bureau that was investigating this, but the slope where the Dyatlov group had pitched their tent was a measly 23-ish degrees. And avalanches usually occur on 30 degrees plus on a slope. And so this was a favorite theory by a lot of people, but with it being too gentle of a slope to have an avalanche to occur, it was back to the drawing board for most enthusiasts and researchers and journalists. And so the mystery sat for 62 years, and for those 62 years, many sleuths, investigators, journalists, forensic analysis, conspiracy hobbyists, all these people have just rifled through all this information and every detail that they can get their hands on. But the avalanche has never really seemed to fit the bill until this year. This next part is entitled Disney, Frozen, and Slab Avalanches. Due to renewed interest in the Dyatlov incident, Russia decided to re-examine the case in 2019, attempting to find an answer to a decades-old cold case. In the same year, they concluded that the Dyatlov pass had been primarily caused by an avalanche. Many Dana analysts were pretty interested in seeing the scientific details of these investigations, but these details were withheld, as well as any clear and vivid and detailed explanations of the conclusions drawn. And so the scientific community was a little bit flabbergasted. They reacted like many math teachers do when they have students that can answer the question but don't show their results. There was a bit of skepticism thrown towards the Russian conclusion. And not for nothing, like, Russia's a country known for being pretty fucking shady and not really transparent. And so many in the scientific community argued against the conclusion. The hill on which the team had cut in the snow had a slope too gentle and mild to produce an avalanche. Additionally, the night of February the 1st to the 2nd didn't have any snowfall. So the slope couldn't accumulate enough snow to create an avalanche. Quite a few members of the Dyatlov group had these blunt force trauma and soft tissue damage that was inconsistent with avalanche victims. There was also the 9-hour span between the cutting of the slope for the tent and the avalanche that was alleged to have happened. This was when Johann Guam, the head of the Federal Institute of Technology of Lausanne, Switzerland, and another colleague teamed up with an Alexander Puzrin, a geotechnical engineer with the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. And these guys got together to build analytical models and computer simulations to show what the 8 to 9 hours, according to forensic data, between the cutting of the slope for the tent and the alleged avalanche would have happened. While compiling the information, they discovered that the 23-degree slope on the tent on which the tent was built was first and foremost actually closer to 30 degrees. And there's a really interesting thing that happens here because this particular site in which everything had happened has these undulating hills. Like the Kolat Sakil has these rolling hills that essentially they don't look like what they are, according to when they have a bunch of snow on them. And so upon looking at the initial reports, they also discovered that there was an underlayer to the snow that didn't clump together, and it was described as a, quote, weak, slippery base that a lot of overlying snow could easily slide over, end quote. And this is according to the National Geographic. And this is where we get back into katabatic winds. Or rather, katabatic winds. And these are something that were also included in their initial investigations, but they kind of brought these forth with this new investigation with Johann Gum. And basically, katabatic winds are when a wind containing a high density air from a higher elevation drains down a slope with the force of gravity. So it's like on one side of a mountain slope having this this balloon, if you will, that's filling up with high density air, and it's really cold air, and then a wind finally pushes it over that mountaintop, which causes a little pop in the balloon to bleed down the other side. So now we have all this cold wind rushing down the opposite side of a mountain slope. And these winds are capable of blowing large amounts of snow downhill, perhaps accumulating weight on the slope above the encampment. This would also explain the delay between the cutting of the encampment and the alleged avalanche. But in order to find these people's conclusions, the team would have to rely on some of the best simulated snow that they could get their hands on. And they found it at the Disney movies, Frozen. I'm going to quote from National Geographic here. Quote, Guam explained how, a few years back, he was struck by how well the movement of snow was depicted in the 2013 Disney movie Frozen. So impressed, in fact, that he decided to ask its animators how they pulled it off. The Walt Disney Company is a major owner and partner with National Geographic. Following the trip to Hollywood to meet with the specialist who worked on Frozen's snow effects, Guam modified the film's snow animation code for his avalanche simulation models, albeit with a decidedly less entertaining purpose, to simulate the impacts that avalanches would have on the human body. so
What?
it's such a...
Don't we have something like? Doesn't MIT have something for this or like?
No,
Like
no,
you're,
Frozen.
you're like
Disney does.
you're like, we should consult the college, and he's like, yes, Disney. It's such a wild story. Anyway, I'm going to continue with Nat Geo.
Like
Quote,
Disney's like, we want avalanches looking so great that we actually figured out the anomalies that happen within them.
yeah, and so again from Nat Geo, quote, the researchers' computer simulations show that the avalanche on Kholat Sakil wouldn't have been huge, perhaps involving a block of icy matter a mere 16 feet long, about the size of an SUV. The small size explains why no evidence for an avalanche was found during the initial investigation. It would have infilled the cutout campsite before being quickly buried by fresh snowfall. End quote. So what we're looking at here is a possible explanation for why
a little
everything
landslide
happened.
of an avalanche.
It's a little landslide of snow, of a very small one. So where the encampment had been set up could have been the site to a small avalanche, but that wouldn't really explain all the blunt force trauma and seen on the bodies. Like most avalanche victims die from asphyxiation, right? Well, Guam gathered data made by GM using 100 cadavers. This data included calibrations and expected results for various weights, speeds, surfaces, such as if the bodies were cushioned up against something like a cushion, or if they were up against concrete, something hard. And they used this to see if the 16-foot-long ice block could be the potential source of these injuries. They used this data to test their hypothesis about the avalanche. The conclusions agreed with what experts had said, that an avalanche of this type is known as a slab avalanche, could potentially build up enough momentum and travel at fast enough speeds to cause severe injuries as seen on some of the bodies. And so I do want to show you guys...
Take somebody's fucking eyeballs out of their face?
No. I don't know what you think, but this is the diagram that they presented on the official release of the scientific documentation. And it's just a simplified model of how if an ice slab with significant force could fall onto a human body, how it could cause impact wounds. And in one thing they emphasize in the study is that they don't have the conclusive, that they don't know exactly what happened. This is just their best argument for it. And I find that it stands up to a lot of scrutiny, which is why I kind of wanted to end this episode with this. And since it does seem to kind of fit, if you had an avalanche moving at such a strong, at such a hard speed with a side that was made of basically like ice, concrete, and it slammed into a tent, it seems like these people would have to cut themselves out of their tent in order to survive the Ural Mountains. Seems that they would have to immediately find something else to do in order to live. But it doesn't really explain one thing.
The radiation.
The goddamn radiation.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
So, there might be an answer to that.
Also doesn't explain the... Wait. not lacerations. The
Lesions.
lesions.
I mean, you could argue that it's from falling down. But the thing that really bothers me is the radiation. And there might be an actual answer to why there was radiation in such small things there. And the answer is this little element called thorium. Thorium had been used as a lighting source for a long while before Dyatlov. Karl Auer von Welschbach perfected what is now properly known as the thorium gas mantle in 1891. And this was an amazing revolution for gas-powered light, as the thorium mantle could handle incandescence, or like lighting up really brightly, and it could handle this to extremely high temperatures without melting. And they were far brighter than the ordinary lanterns that you would get from like electricity. They were even used as household illuminations in cities that used gas-powered lighting. From a website called straightdope.com, which is actually a lot better than it sounds. Quote, but the thorium mantle did enable the American gaslighting industry to survive a surprisingly long time. At its peak, it sold 40 million mantles annually. Mantles were manufactured in quantity here as late as the 1940s, later in other countries. Some streets in London, and at least a few in the U.S., are lit with gas even now. In retrospect, we would have been luckier if thorium mantles hadn't worked quite so well. Mantle production has left behind a formidable environmental mass. Radioactive leftovers from the manufacturing process contaminate soil near former mantle factories to this day. Were it not for the federal Superfund cleanup program, they'd have been doing so for quite a few more days. The most common isotope of thorium has a half-life of 14 billion years. End quote. So it could be that an avalanche happened while they were using a thorium lantern, which it might explain all the things that were happening tonight. And so, like, I'm not going to definitively say anything happened tonight. It's really hard to explain all the events, and the nobody's ever going to really know. But it seems like this new research that's come out in 2021 is a pretty likely source of like how everything possibly happened. I could understand having an avalanche cave in on your tent, having to carve your way out, drag your friends out, having to walk down to the nearest area like a tree well that might offer shelter, building a fire, having friends die, having to worry about going back to the tent, having to try to survive without the... Like, I could understand all of these as they piece along with this story. But it's kind of just one of those things that's never going to be really resolved.
And the like burnt feet things.
Yeah, I mean, that could be dead people sleeping too closely next to fire.
That's true.
You know, it's an interesting story at the very least.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah,
It was wild.
so how y'all feel about going into the cold and camping and hiking? You guys think you're gonna take a little bit more care going out there next time?
I'm definitely gonna do it again, but
I already fucked that up once in my life, so I'm gonna avoid fucking that up again. But yeah,
Probably a good choice.
I decided to climb a mountain in New York in like fall. And I thought, whatever, it's fall.
It's warm enough.
I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I've never been so cold. That night was really cold. I was
bet.
at like fucking 4,000 feet on the side of this mountain. Pretty near the top of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cold. I slept in all my clothes in my sleeping bag.
Yeah. And it's important, like this lesson in particular is important for just people who are even driving, like during hazardous conditions. Like always put a little bit more food in your thing, carry a couple extra blankets. Like when you're leaving in a vehicle, you've got plenty of room to put other shit in there. Make sure that you're safe, because Jesus Christ.
So people die every year getting stuck on the highway.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel, Sean? Have you learned any lessons?
no lessons, but curiosities for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting case, and I've been wanting to do this for basically as long as we've been doing the podcast. So I'm really excited to have done it, because again, it's just one of those curious cases that you're never going to be fully satisfied with the answers. But
yeah.
Anyway, we're gonna get off here. I'm glad you guys are feeling good. It sounds like overall. Do you guys have any last thoughts or plugs?
No.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Buy my butt pads.
Yeah, Sam's making butt pads.
Look for them on YouTube.
Yeah.
Buy Sam's butt pads.
Sam's butts and pads.
Anyway,
maybe not available on Fourth Corner.
you know, we did such a good job opening the episode that
We should really bomb the ending.
we should really bomb the
Well,
ending.
it is almost midnight. We did get kind of a late start, so.
Anyway, thank you guys for listening to our long-winded episode of Dyatlov Pass. It's been a pleasure. I'm Loren. Thank you, Sam and Shawn.
You are welcome.
We'll talk at you listeners next time.
Dun, dun,
Have
dun.
a safe time.